let's go back just a little bit. So we were talking about, funding, and I think the conversation usually ties in where because public schools are always, quote, needing more money. Give us more money, we'll do a better job. Well, if you look at history, even over the last 10 years, and you see what's, okay, it's more and more and more funding goes into these schools every year. The reality is, and so that's the sell to the parents. But the reality is that funding doesn't get to the students. It doesn't get to the classroom. It's not really even going into the teachers. It's going into that whole administrative class where there are layers and layers of administration. And fundamentally, what those people are doing is they are working under the mandates of the federal Department of Education, and they are collecting and gathering data on our children. And, everything that happens and all of the testing and all of the things, the whole redirect in the counselors' offices, and all of that is about collecting data on children. And so, and that's where the funding's going, and that's what they're wanting more and more funding for. And that's not just happening at K-12, that's happening at the university level and on and on. And so I think we need to understand that, look, better funding doesn't necessarily make a better school. Good schools are all about leadership and curriculum that leads to truth and oversight to make sure that it is properly run, administrated, and that the students and their needs are really being addressed, that those children are being equipped as they ought to be. And unfortunately, we're not ever going to paint everything with a broad stroke brush, because there are always wonderful exceptions. But that is a reality. And we sometimes see that even in private schools. And so, it's not just a public and a private issue. It's a leadership issue more than it is a funding issue. Yeah. And I want to go back to on that theme too. I think it's important, as you were talking about parents having a say. Parents need to go to understand what's going on in their schools and so forth. I want to say, I don't care where your children are in school, public, private, or any other place. Yes, parents ought to be doing that, not just if they're in public school, because if the parents are engaged and heavily active and aware, look, students always do better. And every teacher I've ever met and have asked this question, they affirm our students do better when their parents are involved.
Absolutely.
End of story. And so parents, you want your children to thrive in school, get involved. So involvement takes some real commitment. It's about really the commitment, the responsibility of and the ownership of that. And the reality is that always costs. It costs. It costs in time. It may cost in financial resources. But at the end of the day, all of that is an investment into our children. Right. And if parents aren't willing to make that investment, at the end of the day, it's the kids who suffer.
Well, and to be perfectly honest with you, the number one problem in Christian education is lack of parental involvement. I went to a school recently, had 1,600 kids in the school. And they said, we want you, I was going to speak to the faculty and staff. And they said, we want you to speak the night before to the parents. Well, because it was such a huge school, Christian-wise, I said, well, I don't need to coach them on how to get parents there. I show up and they have 25 parents show up at a school of 1,600 students. They were embarrassed. I didn't care. I just spoke my guts out to the parents. But at the end of the day, they were like, and I said, I didn't coach you guys because I thought you were such a large school that you would know how to do this. But it's literally the number one most difficult thing to do is to get parents to come out, to get parents involved in training. And I think it goes back. This is one of the reasons why we have a church and family division that is led by a guy, Dr. Josh Mulvihill. And because the church has this problem too. Here's what parents want to do. They want to say, I'm dropping my kid off at school, and the school will do all the educating. I'm dropping my kid off at Sunday school, and the church will do all the religious education, etc. When it's backwards. The parents are fully responsible for the education of their child from A to Z. They might delegate that authority to somebody to teach calculus or somebody to teach history or English or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, God's going to hold us as parents accountable for how our kids were trained. And so I think there's a great parental crisis. And that's one of the things that Dr. Mulvihill did at the church you first met him out there at Grace Church. He went in and changed the paradigm, which is in the church and family division is what we do at RenewaNation. We go in and rebuild the family ministry program. We now have an online family ministry academy. It's really cool. But we help pastors and family ministry leaders in a church go from the attractional entertainment approach to where we're training and equipping parents and grandparents to train children at home. And so I think the idea years ago, and unfortunately, many of the leaders in the teachers' unions and stuff in the public system, they absolutely think parents have nothing to do with educating their children. And that's a big part of the problem. And parents have bought into that. So we go, okay, we go work 40 hours a week. You educate our kids 40 hours a week, and then we're off the hook. And I just think that's completely unbiblical. Again, that's not God's good design. Therefore, it's not working out well in the real world.
That is so important. I have often talked to school board members and told them, listen, one of the problems we have even in our government schools is that the school is trying to do too much. We've got all your transportation stuff, and I realize some of these things are essential. Some of these things are even mandated by law, but you've got your transportation issues, you've got your feeding programs, you've got your health care provision, you've got all of these kind of things. But at the end of the day, we talk about failing schools. In some sense, there are no real failing schools. There are failing communities. Because when the family is broken and the community is broken, we put our kids in these schools and we expect the schools to turn them out into, marvelous whatever. And occasionally a diamond pops out of the rough. But reality is the home, the community, the culture that child grows up in does more than what happens to some extent even at school to shape that. And then if the school is really tapped into that local community as well, so you have all of this brokenness that's trying to make something well in a school, it just doesn't work. And you have to go back to the foundations. That's what you were talking about in that worldview component. You have to go back to the foundations and fix the foundations. And I've encouraged school boards, look, do public-private partnerships with your local community. They're all kind of faith-based and community groups that can do all kinds of things to help families. Because at the end of the day, if a child comes to school and hasn't eaten at home, since they left school yesterday, and that happens, unfortunately. Child comes to school, they don't know if they're going to stay at their mom's, their dad's, and uncle's, a grandma. They're just tossed around. They have their life is total chaos. Look, that child is in no position to learn and grow. That child needs a support structure built around them that is foundational. And so, and this is a basic universal principle. This is not just something that is public school or private school or anything. It goes back to the foundations and those foundational principles of society. And if we build those things well, it gives our children a much better opportunity to succeed.
Well, again, it goes back. If you live according to God's good design, good things happen. If you violate God's design, horrible things happen. And when the family has broken down, at the fundamental core of any community is the family unit.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one of my nieces, one of your nieces, recently, who's 32 years old, I think, say to me, she said, Uncle Jeff, there are already 7 kids from our church and school. Not all of them went to our school, but some of them did, Christian school. And already 7 of the kids that I grew up with are divorced. I said, really? Name them. She named every one of them. 6 of them came from a broken, messed up home. Okay? And so I said, here's the problem. Public schools and Christian schools are trying to fix problems that only the family can fix.
Yeah.
And I actually have a speech I've been giving lately called Saving Our Families in a World Gone Crazy. And I make a statement in there. I have concluded after 30 years of ministry now that the young people that I could not reach, and that breaks my heart. I look at the ones that we really didn't seem to be successful with, getting on a fantastic path, loving Christ, changing the world. And we've had many, many, many of those. But the ones I had the hardest time reaching were ones who came from homes where the family unit was not what it should be in a significant way of some. There's no perfect family. Nobody has it perfect. But moms and dads, there's a tremendous responsibility laid upon them by God himself to raise their children well. And when we don't raise our children well, when we're selfish, when we don't stay with our spouse, when we don't provide for our kids food, God forbid, then we're not going to have healthy adults. They're going to grow up with a messed up view of the world. And so we need to be there to help those kids that are in that position, because there's millions of them in America. We need to try as schools and churches and communities to help those kids. But at the same time, we got to go back and train young men and women how to have good families so that they can raise good children. Otherwise, the school cannot fix the broken family. That goes into the realm of the church. And that goes into the realm of the community saying, what can we do? And this does get into laws and stuff, Melvin. There are laws that are passed that encourage women to have babies outside of marriage. How dumb is that? What we're doing is violating God's good design. Then we have kids who have no daddies, and those kids who don't have a father, it's proven. Some people say as much as 75% of all men in prison grew up without a healthy father. Okay? It doesn't work. Do it according to God's good design, and good things happen.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And when a kid doesn't have a healthy home, they're much more likely to drop out of school.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look at the statistics and follow it out, a kid who drops out of school before they graduate high school, that ratio 20 years later becomes your prison population. Yeah. It's just, and that's proven, that can be tracked. Yeah. And so it's in our best interest to invest now in the foundations that help our children get a good start so that they can finish well. So let's switch gears here just for a second, Jeff. So one of the big issues in education, and I think this is true across the board, but is certainly true in public education because of some of the things, some of the breakdowns that have been happening, and again, not broad stroke brush because not right. All schools are this. It's about leadership really over here. But so many schools, teachers don't feel safe. They feel threatened. The violence, the kids are in charge in the schools too often, and, bullying and just total inability to have control in the classroom. Everybody's afraid they're going to get sued, so nobody does anything, and all of that kind of chaos. On top of that, you have sometimes policies that are passed down through whether it's the agencies or whether it's the administrators or however that happens. And you have people that are saying, look, I'm here, my training, my expertise, my passion is math. And you're telling me, I got to put up certain flags on certain months and I got to promote this and promote that. Wait a minute. I don't even believe in that. Furthermore, that's not what I got hired to do here. And so what we're seeing are this massive exodus going out of our schools. That's one of the number one crises that our schools across this country are having is a lack of teachers. Mm-hmm. Almost every school district in the public system is short. It has a shortage of teachers. And so let's talk to the teachers for just a little bit, because the reality is, and well, there are some dud teachers in probably most schools,
Oh, yeah.
right? But there are also some wonderful men and women out there who care deeply about our kids. They made a life decision to make a career of investing in children and helping those children become responsible adults and healthy members of our society. But honestly, many of them are very discouraged today. Talk
Well,
to them.
I'm kind of on the other side of that coin because a lot of those public school teachers are coming into Christian education for the very reason you spoke of. They're taking 20, 30, $40,000 a year pay cuts because the fact of the matter is, and there's, this is a very complex discussion that we won't get into all the details, but Christian schools can still kick kids out. They can still expel kids, and they don't have a lot of red tape to do it. And private schools in general do that. And that's why you can maintain control of your student body. I had a woman from a local public school system where I live come to me one day, and she was a single woman. She could only afford to teach in the public schools because she couldn't afford to come to work for my Christian school. But she had had a football player the week before pick up a desk, throw it across the room, break out the windows in the classroom. She came to me. She said, I am petrified because they took him out of my class for 1 week, never suspended the boy from school, and 1 week later put him on the front seat, and he sat there and glared at me all day long. And I went to the principal and said, I'm scared to death of this kid. And she said, well, maybe you're just not a good fit for our school system. And she said, did you report to the police what he did? And she said, the principal looked me in the face and said, I did not. It will make us look bad. So there's no doubt there's a crisis of control and authority in many, many schools today. But again, it goes back to where we've abandoned truth. We've abandoned the idea of discipline and instruction and demanding something from and expectations of our children. So at the end of the day, what I want to say to the teachers real quick is that um, I remember the name. I remember the look, the smell of my first grade teacher almost. I remember my second grade teacher. I remember almost every teacher I ever had. And I remember that, they formed my thinking. They shaped me into the man I am today to a great degree. And so, even though if you're teaching the public school system, let me just say this to you. Specifically, if you're a Christian, you're a missionary. That is your mission field. And it's getting more difficult. I talk to public school educators all the time, and they're telling me that it's getting more difficult, especially when it comes to the transgender and the pronouns and all that now. Some of them are getting fired because they won't do it. But just keep in mind that every single one of those children sitting before you was created in the image of God. I don't care what kind of school system you're in. They were created in the image of God. God stamped his ability to think, design, plan, create, and communicate upon these children. And your goal is to help them see themselves as God sees them and to inspire in them this desire to go into this world and make it better and to change our world for goodness and to help them understand that they're not just a clump of cells. They're not a cosmic accident. But even if you're a Christian, you can let them know their ultimate value. And if you can slip it in occasionally, tell them God created you to be somebody. He's given you a tremendous purpose. And so I know your work is difficult. I know it's thankless often. I know you don't see the long-term impact of your teaching every single day. But I'm telling you, I say to Christian educators all the time because I speak to lots of them. I get up and say, it is my honor to stand in your presence because no one in this world is doing anything greater than passing on the truth to the next generation. And so I know it's tough. And I will say this again, the public school system are creating their own messes in the places where they're not supporting their teachers and where they're not demanding discipline. I'm sure I know there are smaller community public school systems where they still demand respect. They don't let the kids run the school. And there's teachers are staying there 10, 20, 30, 40 years. But I will just say this to any public, educated educator or administrator. If you're not willing to support your teachers and you're not willing to demand that kids respect the teachers and respect each other and behave, you're going to gut your school. A local school system here close to where I live, one of the FCA guys told me that a year ago, last fall, they were losing 40% of their teachers. You know why? That's the same system where that lady had that guy throw the desk across her classroom. Teachers, first of all, students can't learn in that environment well, and teachers can't teach when they're scared for their life. The other thing they've done, and this is a whole different subject, but when you demand that they teach to a certain test or a standard constantly, that's all you do. We got these tests in April, and if you don't get them there, they stop teaching and they just start trying to get kids to memorize stuff. And we've lost the beauty and the wonder of learning in that moment. That's a wholly different subject.
Yep. Couldn't agree more, Jeff. I know that we think a lot alike, and I guess it goes back to worldview. But truth matters, and as Jeff was saying to all of the teachers out there, listen, do the right thing, and the right thing is to stand on the side of truth. Love those kids, and just hang on for them. If you can't, listen, there are other opportunities. There are huge growth things, as Jeff was saying, in the private schools and the Christian schools. There are opportunities often, opportunities for you to work there. The homeschool movement, the co-ops, all of these things. It's just, there are all kinds of opportunities available if that's a choice you decide to make. We're not encouraging people to bail. What we're encouraging is for people to keep holding on for principles and truth, because at the end of the day, that's what builds up kids. And you know that. And so just stand strong on those points. Now,
Melvin, can I just add one
yeah,
thing to that?
Sure.
Let me say this too. I spoke at a very large place with a few thousand people not long ago, and there was probably 150 public school educators in that building that day. All the way from the superintendent of schools of that community on down was there. And here was my challenge to them. And this is a little bit straightforward, but I want to say it. Don't try to stay so long that you end up endorsing evil. And what I said to those public school teachers and administrators in that setting, I said, listen to me, stand up and fight. Because I said, if you stand by, well, they tell a 15-year-old girl she ought to have her breasts removed, or castrate a 14-year-old kid, or start pumping hormones in the body. That's child abuse. And you are a party to that if you're saying nothing just to keep your job. So there's an appropriate way to do that. But the bottom line is I'm saying to the public school educators who are listening to this show today, stand up and fight. Don't be afraid. If you will be faithful to God and faithful to truth and faithful to those precious kids. You know, the detransitioners are coming out now and they're suing hospitals. And I read after a girl, she's now in her 20s, maybe late 20s. She said, when I was 15 years old, they took my breast off. She said, they kept telling me if I take the hormones and get the next treatment, I'd find myself and find the happiness I was looking for. She said, now I'm utterly miserable. And she said, why didn't somebody stop them? And so I'm very passionate about this point. When I talk to public school educators right now, I'm saying if you believe, if you're a Christian, stand up, or if you're not a Christian, but you believe that this is wrong, stand up and fight. And don't be afraid of losing your job, because if you do what is right, God will honor you.
Let me just add this too. The vast majority of parents are on this side.
Absolutely.
Okay? The vast majority. And it doesn't matter. I was with some school board candidates this weekend, and they're finding great support in the Indian and Hindu community, in the Muslim community, and on and on. Why? It's the reality is, even with other religions, these principles are still true. Truth is truth. And when it comes down to these issues and these concerns over their kids, the parents don't want this stuff. It's somebody outside that is forcing this stuff down. And, let's stand together, parents and educators, and let's get this right. We can do it if we'll stand.
Absolutely.
So, Jeff, as we wrap up, maybe just kind of share with everybody some how they can learn more about your organization, some of the resources they can get there. I know that in some states there are scholarship opportunities and so forth. So just run through a few things and we'll try to put these things in the program notes. We can communicate with you guys and get some of that stuff. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people are resourced.
Sure.
They have the tools so that they can act on what they hear.
Yeah.
So share with us briefly.
Okay. So first of all, just our website is RenewaNation.org or just RenewaNation.org. And that's a good place to go and learn a lot more about us. Let me just mention 2 or 3 really helpful resources to parents and grandparents. One is we have a relatively new book that is just going bonkers called 50 Things Every Child Needs to Know Before Leaving Home. So if you have children or grandchildren, it's a workbook, it's a guidebook, it's powerful. And especially if your kids are not in a Christian school where they may not be getting some of that daily training, this book will help you teach them everything from how to introduce themselves to inductive Bible study, essentially. So it's powerful. And Dr. Josh Mulvihill wrote that. We also have a book called Biblical Worldview, What It Is, Why It Matters, and How to Shape the Worldview of the Next Generation. It's written for parents and grandparents. Tremendous resource for churches, schools, whatever, obviously Christian schools. And then let me just say this, Melvin, and again, your ministry is to really support those who God has called to be missionaries in the public schools, and that's great. But if the number one group that's calling us to launch new Christian schools right now are public school teachers and administrators. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's no longer the churches calling us as much. It's public school teachers and administrators are launching Christian schools all across America. And the transgender issue has been the final straw for many of them. So if somebody's listened to this and God has laid that on your heart, we have a wonderful program. We bring a coach into your life. They will walk you from A to Z if God ever would call you to do that. Or if a pastor's listening to this and feels like that's what God's calling them to do. So there's just a lot of other things that we have to offer, but I thought I'd just mention a couple of those. For grandparents, Dr. Josh Mulvey has written many wonderful books on grandparenting, but we have kind of the classic book just called Grandparenting. And it will help you to understand that God has called you as grandparents to be highly engaged in the development of your grandchildren. And so if you're a grandparent and you want to see really it's all from the scripture. What is God's design for grandparenting? Those are just a few of the many resources that we have that I think could be helpful to some of your listeners.
Excellent, Jeff. Thank you for spending time with us today. Our listeners have a lot to unpack, and I really appreciate you spending time with us and just sharing your heart with us.
Well, it's my privilege, Melvin, and keep up the good work. And let's take over every school board in America, and let's see what will happen.
There you go. And so all of you out there who've been listening, thank you for joining us. We have our weekly podcast, so follow if you like this, and then that way you'll be able to tap into all of those podcasts. We also have a blogcast that puts out all of our blogs and turns those into audio if you like those. We have a lot of resources on our own website, Noah Webster Educational Foundation. Our website is NWEF.org, NWEF.org. Thank you for staying in with us, and thank you for all that you do to change the world where you are.